Hi, I'm a higher ed CMO and I have a confession to make. I am incredibly frustrated by the way that higher education does not prioritize recruiting non-traditional or post-traditional students. I am really excited to be bringing on the show today Seth Odell, who's going to be talking to us about the importance and the ways we can recruit post-traditional students. Welcome to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, the podcast designed for higher education marketers. I'm your host, Jaime Hunt, and I am so excited to have this opportunity to share insights and inspiration. With Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, I'm designing a different kind of podcasting experience. With each episode, I'll be bringing in a guest for a deep dive into the challenges and joys we all face in higher education marketing. After each episode, you can join the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag HigherEdCMO. I would love to see this become like a book club, but for a podcast. And be sure to follow me on Twitter at JamieHuntIMC. That's JamieHuntIMC for more opportunities to connect. So I'm super excited today to be talking to Seth Odell, who is the CEO of Kanahoma Agency. Welcome to the show, Seth.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jaime. Really looking forward to the conversation. Appreciate the chance to come on.
I have been following the development of Kanahoma over the past about a year, right? And it has been really exciting to see. Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, happy to. So I've been in the education space for over 15 years. I worked at UCLA, Southern New Hampshire University, so I went from traditional to kind of non-traditional, post-traditional. And then I was at GM at Helix Education and then Vice Chancellor at National University System. But last couple of years, November, so next month is 2 years, I launched Kanahoma, which is a new education marketing agency. We're a full-service shop. Primarily serving institutions that kind of cross over between traditional and non-traditional, so campus students and adult and online. And started with just myself in a bedroom during COVID, and last week we onboarded our 20th full-time employee, which has been wild. And so we've been growing like crazy and just been very grateful for the response. A lot of institutions are looking for performance marketing support. So we provide paid media management. We have 6 full-time media buyers buying ads, 5 full-time creatives, web services team, and so kind of just doing our best to partner with institutions that are primarily looking to drive enrollment. That's really kind of our sweet spot, is more on like the performance driving side, and just trying to keep up with everything that's been coming in. It's been a really crazy and blessed last couple of years, to say the least.
That is awesome. In 2 years to grow to 20 employees, that is amazing. That feels atypical?
Yeah, it is definitely not what I expected. Even when I started, I wasn't sure if it was going to be just me doing the consulting. And I thought launching during COVID would have been not ideal timing. But I think in hindsight, I sort of launched like right when everyone was moving from defense to offense and starting to realize that, okay, like we need to figure out how to address the enrollment challenges that we might have experienced during the pandemic. And so it has definitely not been growth we've pursued. We've only ever done 3 RFPs in 2 years. We don't reply. It's all been folks texting and calling and reaching out. And so, we'll see if that dries up and I have to hit the conference circuit next year maybe. But so far, it's more been like a hold on to the wheel, and feels like we're going downhill and just trying to keep up and keep pace with everything.
That is tremendous. And you mentioned a couple weeks ago that you had something like 300 applicants for one of your roles. That is amazing.
Yeah, we're actually averaging over 500. We had 800 for our last job opening. We're a fully remote company, 100% remote, and have just been really trying. One, I'm a real big pro-labor person. Personally, grew up in a very liberal, labor-friendly family, but also I think it's time for employers to kind of see where the market's going. So we're 100% remote. We're 100% asynchronous, so staff can set their own hours and work whenever they want. And we cover 100% of all benefits, so health, dental, vision for employees, spouses, dependents, large match on a 401k. We were one of the first companies in California to start paying student loans on behalf of our employees prior to Biden's announcement. So we were actually, I think, the third in San Diego County to offer that. And so just trying to be a future-focused employer, and thankfully rather, that's been really well received. And so folks seem eager. And I thought no one would want to come join like a new company that doesn't totally know where it's going or what it's doing. And I've like learned that's actually the opposite. People are like weirdly attracted to the kind of momentum and chaos. I think trying to escape some monotony maybe on their side. And so I've been very grateful at the response.
I'm so happy for you. It's always great to see wonderful people have wonderful success. And I think it speaks to your character and the kind of company that you're trying to run, that you have had this wonderful, absolutely amazing growth in such a short period of time.
Thanks so much, Jaime. I appreciate that.
So one of the things that you just mentioned is that you're really focused on, well, maybe focus isn't the right word, but you're really working with folks on recruiting what you have referred to in the past as post-traditional students. How do you define post-traditional?
Traditionally, folks have called it non-traditional, and we looked at the market sort of as traditional high school age students that progress to college. You're 18 to 22-year-olds living on campus. And when I first came up in the industry, so I joined Southern New Hampshire in 2011. They're now the largest nonprofit in the country. But at the time, they only had 7,000 students. And so even then, we talked more about non-traditional, which meant typically folks that were over the age of 24, 25. They were studying part-time and or working part-time, juggling work and family. And so they had alternative kind of obstacles. And that is very much a significant part of the market. It's much larger than people realize. I have kind of just over time evolved, and I'm sure I picked it up from somebody smarter than me, to talking more about post-traditional, because I don't think the lines of traditional and non-traditional are as clear anymore. There's actually a great article just at Inside Higher Ed this week about how much younger online students are getting. We even saw that in 2014 and 15. The average age of an adult online learner used to be like the mid-30s, and then it's been creeping down towards 30, and it's going to pretty quickly, I think next year, that the average will be below. And so we're getting to a place now where even 18 to 22-year-olds are choosing to study at an online institution. And so to me, those are post-traditional students. Even though they fit within the age demographic of a traditional student, they're looking for an alternative educational offering that is not a traditional residential experience. And so post-traditional to me is, it represents both that non-traditional definition a lot of us have thought about adult learners, and embraces the reality that even younger students these days are looking for an alternative path to completing their degree.
I thought that Inside Higher Ed article was fascinating. Like the idea that students are looking for a different type of experience than that traditional experience. And I'm curious about whether you think that the pandemic has accelerated that, because so many students had a fully online high school experience or a fully online freshman and sophomore year, things like that. Do you think that has played a role?
Absolutely. I think so. It's played a significant role for a few reasons. One, people's expectations, I think, have changed. They've gone online and in some cases have enjoyed it, or at least found the trade-offs to be acceptable. And so that's been effective for them. And I think that's definitely been like a piece that it's been forced on. I think we're also seeing that the folks that were like already leaders have pushed even further forward. So organizations like Southern New Hampshire or New Mexico State, they're actually offering like fully online programs for athletes. And, athletes traditionally had some of the lowest completion rates at institutions. They're traveling significantly, especially if you're D1. And now the idea that you can not just have one or two online classes, but you could potentially live on campus and study 100% online. That's happening today, even though it's not being talked about. And to me, that's the reality of like, where and how does the modality meet or exceed the needs of the student? And it's really like nuanced. I do think there's students that have gotten lost in the shuffle in the pandemic. We saw a 20% decline year over year in students progressing to community colleges. I think a lot of them have ended up in the gig economy. They may still be living at home with their parents. And so they're not looking to now suddenly switch to a residential experience after a gap year or two. And so all of these factors combined, I think, is just a real appetite. And I think it reflects that there's a generational shift that has happened within our student population, even if it hasn't happened at the administration level. When I left UCLA in 2011, I got laughed out of UCLA for leaving to go to a school no one had ever heard of in New Hampshire because I wanted to work in online education because it was sort of looked down upon. And even when I first started at Southern New Hampshire, multiple people talked to me about like, you're working in online education, what's that like? I feel like that conversation is gone, and perhaps the pandemic did play a role there because when all of the Ivy League schools go 100% online and the research backs up that the outcomes related to online education can meet or exceed that of a traditional campus, suddenly a lot of those like early arguments sort of start to fade away. And even if the administration is largely the same as it has been 5 or 10 years ago, the student population is totally turned over. I think it's a really significant shift, and I think it's only heading in one direction, pretty clearly, at least for the folks that are watching.
Yeah. When I started my master's degree, it's a fully online program in 2009, and I remember, sorry, Mom, I know you're listening, but I remember my mom being sort of skeptical, like, oh, it's online, like it wasn't the same, but it was an incredibly rigorous program. I mean, the amount of papers and discussion groups and conversations that I had to have, it was a different modality, but it was just as rigorous. But it let me maintain having a full-time job, and I think that makes such a big difference from an equity and accessibility perspective.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that it's really interesting that these days, at the time that you did that, it might have been a reality. Like, I got my master's online as well. Sometimes people hear about the institution, and the institution's known for being more online. And so people might equate the degree to the modality. But that's the other thing that the pandemic sort of thrown out the window is, like, these days you can get a degree from some pretty traditionally what we describe as prestigious institutions from a ranking perspective that are all online, but doesn't say it anywhere on the diploma. It doesn't say it on your LinkedIn. There's no way for anybody to really know. And so there's sort of this ambiguity now that you really can't read the modality out of a degree anymore. And so it's really the quality of the overall institution's like brand equity and market. Because I had the same experience, and I'm just so curious if I was getting my master's today, if I'd have had those conversations like I did maybe 7 or 8 years ago when I first started the program.
Hey all, I hope you're enjoying this episode of Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO. I want to take a moment to thank my friends at MindPower who are making Season 2 of this Enrollify podcast possible. MindPower is a full-service marketing and branding firm celebrating nearly 30 years of needle-moving, thought-provoking, research-fueled creative and strategy. MindPower is woman-founded and owned, WBENC certified, nationally recognized, and serves the social sector, higher education, healthcare, nonprofits, and more. The MindPower team is made up of strategists, storytellers, and experienced creators. From market research to brand campaigns to recruitment to fundraising, the agency exists to empower clients, amplify brands, and help institutions find a strategic way forward. You can learn more about their work in the world by heading on over to MindPower Inc. That's MindPowerinc.com. And be sure to tell the crew that Jaime sent you their way. I felt really defensive about it. Like working in higher ed at the time and being like, not wanting people to know it was online, but obviously they had to know because it was West Virginia University and I was not living in West Virginia at the time. But the shift is really fascinating. Last week I was visiting with some international students who were talking about, the student I was talking to is taking a fully online course load, right? But living on campus and having that experience. But she just felt like the modality suited her learning style better.
Totally. And I think that's super justified. And for a lot of folks, one of the small nuances of online is, you lose the back row. When you leverage message board structure with mandatory engagements, the idea of, hiding out in class doesn't really work, or the student that's really vocal sort of hogging the teacher's time. A lot of things fade away. And so it's certainly not for everybody. But I will say, my online master's was significantly harder than my on-campus undergraduate experience. It should be as a graduate level educational experience, but it still was, even though it was online and on campus. And I just think that our populations that we are attracting and we're reaching out to, this is like not even a conversation for them anymore, and yet it's so present, still a conversation for many of us at the institutional level. And I think that's just a sign of like any time in leadership, how do you keep up with a shifting market? And I think a lot of students are doing their best. I don't want to say everybody's caught on their heels. There's been a lot of leaders in this space, but certainly it's evolving, I think, faster on kind of the front lines of the student expectation, maybe than it is internally for a lot of us at the organizations that we serve.
I'm really excited to be at an institution now that has, I want to say they have about 6,000 online students, and it's largely bachelor's degrees. So I had made an assumption that it was going to be master's degrees before I dug into it a little bit. And we have a lot of students doing fully online bachelor's degrees. And we have a large military population. So like 25% of our students are military affiliated. And it just gives them the opportunity to have that asynchronous experience. Maybe you're stationed somewhere for a year you can still take your classes and do them at what would be 4 a.m. here, but you're doing them at your normal time abroad.
Absolutely. I mean, the organization you're at is just such an interesting example, too, given the breadth of the overall traditional student population, which I think is over 20,000. And so you talk about an organization of significant scale that is also invested in online and non-traditional students. And not knowing the legacy of it, I'm sure it's driven by the desire to serve those who serve, because they've always had unique needs in that population. But it's just so exciting to see the larger organizations that you'd think theoretically have like more entrenched bureaucracy and move slower, actually move like quite fast and be a leader in the space. There's a lot I think that other folks, especially maybe smaller privates, could take as lessons from that. If these large organizations can move so quickly and be so effective, definitely shows there's still a lot of room for folks to step in and
Absolutely.
serve.
So as we have the conversation in higher education about the enrollment cliff, I think about this post-traditional population as being an audience that we could be attracting to help with enrollment challenges. What are your thoughts on that?
So that's definitely the first place that a lot of folks think from a revenue perspective, and when applied correctly, it is absolutely true. The demographic cliff on the private side is coming. We're going to see less students graduating high school every year for more or less the next 10 years. And so we're seeing a lot of smaller privates under significant enrollment pressure. 20% of all institutions in the state of Vermont have closed or merged in the past 5 years, which is unbelievable. 20% of the entire state's institutions have just gone away. And they're the front lines statistically for a few reasons on why. The highest colleges per capita, highest price tuition for almost any state. But they're the canary in the coal mine. They're not the last. And so folks have looked to the non-traditional population to diversify from a revenue perspective. And I definitely think that generally speaking makes sense. Just at the adult undergraduate level, there's over 40 million adults in the U.S. today that have some form of credit and no credential, meaning that they essentially started college at some point and they didn't finish. It doesn't mean that they all want to go back and finish, but a significant portion of them do. And the data still shows that they get a large economic lift if they do complete that degree. And so they need kind of a low-cost, flexible, transfer-friendly solution. That said, the market has really shifted, and as demand is declining, supply online is way up. 2,500 of the 4,000 colleges in this country that offer financial aid all have online programs, and there's over 850 online MBAs. And so we are seeing a real saturation. Like nobody needs another online MBA. Different degrees or even flavors of that with concentration models. There's a world of strategies folks have used to just absolutely be successful in this space. But the playbook is evolving pretty quickly. And so even when I started at Southern New Hampshire, the marketing was very different back then. It was almost like all you had to do was open up the door and students walked in because there was such a need. And now the market is flipped and students have a tremendous amount of options. And I would argue too many options to actually research. Like there's really no effective way to find the right online institution anymore. You can't go online and evaluate, every MS in data analytics. There's literally hundreds. And so how do students evaluate? And so that it's gotten complicated. But as a marketer, I actually love that because to me it means that the challenge we have is a marketing challenge because there is market demand. There's just too much supply. But that's definitely the shift. A lot of folks see that shift in campus. I always caution people, don't look at it just to drive alternative revenue because it's going to cost money in the short term. It costs a lot more to acquire students at the non-traditional side. But it is a very worthy investment, and I do think the idea of institutions reflecting on who they are and how that may shift is important, and saying like, what's our population today? I mean, we even have clients now at Kanahoma where we have this conversation about like, are you aware that you are more than 50% non-traditional? Like when we look at your revenue and we look at your student population, you are majority non-traditional. And yet when you go to your website or review your emails or walk on campus or talk to people even just internally, you don't sense or feel that because the students are online. And so I think a lot of institutions are going through that culturally of even where they're garnering success, figuring out how does that shape or change who they are. And I think the best folks are the ones who are saying, this is directionally where we want to go. We're going to lean into this. And with it, hopefully capture some demand and then also allow maybe our organization to, enter a new chapter.
Yeah, it totally does. I think listening to what students want is a really important piece of that, because if you're listening to students and they say they want a hybrid experience or they want a fully online experience and you're not providing that, you're going to miss out. I mean, it's do or die at that point.
Absolutely. And that's where I think, we talk about listening to students, they're looking for a lot of alternatives too. So, we've obviously seen a big decoupling of the degree and growth in boot camps and non-credentialed offerings. Right now, those have been held off because financial aid is by and large only allowed to be applied to traditional degrees. There are some pilot programs where they're allowing it to be applied to boot camps. If tomorrow they woke up and said you can apply federal aid to non-degrees, I candidly think a good chunk of our industry would collapse. And it'd be a very, very big change because the market is not looking to spend 2 to 4 years on a degree. They're looking for something more expedited, which is also why we're seeing folks move straight into the workforce. We're seeing a growth in organizations, even down like Starbucks that are offering, fully paid degrees with ASU if you work with them. And, there's a lot of conversations on Reddit right now, people saying, should I go to college or should I go to work? And if I can go to work and get someone else to pay for the degree, does that put me in a better place right now? And so it's a lot of shifts in what students are looking for, and again, a lot of price pressure too. The days of the 80s and 90s, take out $100 million loans and build up big buildings and jack up tuition to cover it. Like, that's come home to roost. And so I don't see the same building and land grab taking place like it did, even just 15 years ago for folks that were trying to build the newest dorms and have the best, sushi chefs in the cafeterias to recruit. That still exists, certainly in some places, but I think it's just not the future for a lot of
No
folks.
more lazy rivers.
Yes, exactly.
So how is marketing to a post-traditional audience different than marketing to, say, those high school students who are looking for that traditional college experience?
So great question. So there's so many ways. So I'm going to see how few I can give you and keep it concise. The first I'd say is high school students are working on a fixed timeline while adult students are working on a variable timeline, meaning that, high school students are working, and it's important, they're working in unison. So they're working in unison on a fixed timeline while adults are working uniquely on their own path in a variable. High school students move through a cycle. They get recruited in the cycle and they make decisions in the cycle. That does change a little bit. There's students who do early admission. There's students who decide to wait till the summer after they graduate and they end up at a community college or open access private institution or a public institution close by with that has room. But generally speaking, there is a cycle and a path to this. And there is sort of a cultural corralling that's taking place, at least within most high schools. And so those students are you have a different level of their attention, whether it's college fairs or still doing direct mail or email. And so even though it's difficult to reach them in some areas, like paid social, where there's age restrictions, it's quite easy to reach them in others, at least historically when they were all taking tests. And you could buy the list from the College Board, which is harder than ever with more and more test optional institutions. On the adult side, you're competing with inertia. And so, especially at the adult undergraduate level with credit, which is 40 million, but also at the adult graduate, these are folks who have competing priorities. The average adult today sees between 4,000 and 10,000 ads a day. And I couldn't tell you a single one I saw yesterday, right? And so how do you get in front of someone like that and introduce your offering at the exact right time? The first answer is don't create demand, capture it, which means let's go to paid search. But the problem is everybody's on paid search, and it's going to cost you $30 to buy a click on the term online MBA. So no one's making any money. People are spending $50,000 to recruit a student into a $20,000 program, losing their shirts, and there's another institution behind them willing to bid it up. And so there's a real weirdness taking place on paid search as a bidding platform. That for those that can make it work, it works, but it's very expensive and it's complicated and takes a lot of expertise to do. And then if you're not going to do that, you kind of got to interrupt people. And so, paid social has been a strong player in doing that. You can target folks at the adult level that you can't in high school. You really can't target 16 to 18-year-olds almost at all in any meaningful way. But above 18, you can. And so the recruitment's different, but the offer has to be different too. What they're looking for is different. If I had to oversimplify and be a reductionist, I would say that traditional students want experience, where adult students want outcome. And so those are very different things. And especially on the adult side, one of those things is risk aversion and the likelihood that they'll succeed, which is, you're not in high school, more or less, within reason. If you're recruiting a high school student and they choose to not go to your institution, they probably chose to go somewhere else. For an adult student, if you're recruiting them and they chose not to go to your institution, they probably just didn't go back to school. And so you're really up against some different motivations and obstacles in that sense. And so it's a little more complicated. It's a little bit more nuanced, and it's unfortunately even more of a numbers game. that you just have to kind of reach as many folks as you possibly can and have strong outreach strategies. And so the business has been built heavily on, email and call center models and high outreach and high customer service. That's historically been the path, coupled with a big paid media budget to try to figure out how to get in front of people and interrupt them and at the right time make a connection, which is not easy, but folks have found a way to do.
When you were tweeting about this a few weeks ago, you wrote about the 4 Ps of recruiting post-traditional students. Can you share with the listeners what those are and why they're important?
Absolutely. So like all good things I say, they come from people smarter than me. So this was taught to me by a guy named Seth Odell, who is the CEO of Southern New Hampshire University's College of Online and Continuing Education, which is the division I worked for. And he was talking to me about recruiting adult students because really this conversation, I was coming from UCLA, at the time, one of now the most popular university in the country from an application perspective. No shortage of interest. You come to a smaller school in New England that folks haven't heard of before, and it's a little bit of a different conversation. And so he gave me 4 things, and I translated them into the 4 Ps because I like alliteration, and I came up as a copywriter, and it helps me remember. So they are program, price, pace, and probability. So program, price, pace, and probability. And what he said is essentially adult students, when they make it to your website, they have 4 questions. It's, do you have my program? How much does it cost? How fast can I finish? And then can I or should I do it? And so program was really, he said he was a big believer in don't market program specific, market the program portfolio. That for the most part, Target doesn't market products, right? You just in your head know what Target has and you choose to go to Target or not. And so, a lot of folks have been successful in doing portfolio strategies. It's very expensive to do program specific. And so we still did some, but he pushed us towards just make people think that no matter what, we have the program for them, and let them come to the website, and the website's job is to help figure out if that's true and to match them with a right fit program. Then once they get to that program page, it's really about pace and price. Pace is one that a lot of folks leave off, which is speed to completion. It's hard to calculate because it's not just the length of the program, it's the length of the program minus the credits you're able to transfer in. And so that will help you figure out, well, can I finish this in 6 months or 12 months or 2 years? And folks are very much focused on that finish line and how can I finish? On the price side, we talked a lot about this reality of, okay, how do we not just talk about credit? One of the biggest mistakes in higher ed is people talk about cost per credit, which is a meaningless term to most students. And what they really want is a cost per course. What they really want is a cost per program. And so we can do that math for them and tell them that. And then the final one was probability. And that was really a can I or should I do it moment. And so people are kind of at this crossroads. They're on the website. They're thinking about it. They don't want to give you information. They don't want to apply because they know as soon as they do, you're going to hound them. And they're not really sure they want to do this yet. And so folks like to sort of sit on the fence and think about things, especially large purchase decisions. This is the second largest purchase decision of someone's life outside of buying a house. And if someone is currently a renter, this is going to be the most expensive thing they've ever done. So understandably, they take time to evaluate. And so that final one was the lesson he taught me the most, which is that's what creative does. Creative can really have a conversation about probability. It can leave people with a feeling and a sense that this institution gets me, this offering fits my lifestyle, and I feel more confident with you than with someone else. And that was really the task he gave us with creative, was how do you convey that they have a higher chance of probability here, and not just with facts, but with feelings, and get people to connect and get over the hump. So program, price, pace, and probability were the 4 Ps that he really pushed, and that's been a structure I've carried with me ever since, and it's been kind of a part of all the work I've done over the course of my career.
And that's clearly worked for Southern New Hampshire.
Yeah, there's a lot of very, very smart people at Southern New Hampshire University, a lot of people smarter than me, but during my time there, we grew from 7,000 to 70,000 students. And today they're over 165,000 students, and I think they'll do over $1 billion in tuition revenue this year. And so, extraordinary organization, moved early when the window was open, and operational acumen, out the wazoo. Just unbelievably sharp folks from an ops perspective. And so, but it did work. And I think my job was the brand creative, so I did the TV commercials. I did 35 commercials while I was there, and played only a small role, but certainly got a chance to hit on some of those points and hopefully make a difference.
So my experience has been that a lot of institutions we'll spin up online programs, but we're going to approach the marketing in a very traditional way. And it's always seemed like institutions want to bury that tuition information. They want to, everything's buried. It's your website is it shouldn't be a scavenger hunt to find out what your tuition is going to cost. It shouldn't be a scavenger hunt to find out what programs you have. And yet that seems to be the case. Why are universities doing that? Why are we not more savvy about this?
That's a great question. So my subjective thought would be that I think historically institutions that are primarily traditional have had marketing departments that are primarily service units. And so they are providing marketing at the behest of those that are not marketers and traditional academic administration. And so, an academic administrator or maybe a program chair, they might be focused on how can I fit all the program information possible on the web page, because I want someone to have all the information possible. And as a marketer, we might tell them, actually, if you give the less information, it will give them a reason to contact you. And then once they contact you, you can actually have the conversation. So we do want to deliver. I've never met with an academic where I didn't share the desire to convey the information that they wanted. The only difference that we ever had was when we wanted to convey it. And my belief is always that there's a concept called messaging hierarchy, which is that what the student wants and needs at the point of pre-awareness to awareness to inquiry to app start to app start, that changes, and the conversation we have with them needs to evolve. And so I want to talk about all the specifics with them, but if you put that on a website and you put that someone's going to have to take 3 math classes, what's going to happen is they're going to remember the time math was really hard, either in high school or perhaps even in college when they started that program and didn't finish. Math is one of the primary drivers of students that actually drop out for an academic reason. And so you're putting them in a situation, English is the other for writing, where you can overwhelm them. And yet if you waited and they inquired, then you can have this conversation of well, did you know that we actually have 24/7 math tutoring? Did you know that we have a writing center? You don't have to nail this essay first time. We're here. We have resources for you today that maybe didn't exist when you tried before, but we can't have that conversation on the website and predict every person's area of concern. But an enrollment representative on the phone absolutely can. That's their entire job, is to coach through that conversation and try to figure out if there's a right fit there. And so, lean websites are far more functional. The homepage, only job of the homepage is to get people to a program. If I could wave one wand in higher ed, I would do away with every hero video that I've ever seen ever that loads the site slow, that doesn't do anything for anybody. And we're not quite there yet, but I will say the institutions that are embracing that are seeing a significant uptick. I mean, it is not hard for us at Kanahoma to increase our partners' conversion rates easily double digits on the homepage, sometimes triple digits, in the span of 90 to 100 days, just by applying a lens where we put the prospective student first and we say, we're here to address every one of their questions and concerns, but not on the website. We're here to address the right amount of concerns, to connect them to the rep, to have the right amount of concerns addressed there, and let's let this conversation evolve rather than overwhelming somebody. There's a reason why at the car lot they let you drive the car before they make you sit down with finance and read through everything, right? Let's build an emotional connection. Let's see ourselves being successful in having this experience. And then let's talk about the nitty gritty. We're not here to trick anybody to go back to school in a program that's not right for them. But the reality is when our obstacle is inertia, there's a lot of folks that just need the right support and the right encouragement. And one of those tools can actually be a website that says less, not more.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Do you remember back in the olden days when I think it was Duke just had a search on their homepage? That was their homepage. It was just a search. I kind of love that.
It's a big move. There's also one where someone was jokingly redesigning college pages as if they were Craigslist. And I was like, that's so great. That's what they should be. I mean, it's just because even then I'll say not enough folks are redesigning their websites with performance as the primary motivator. There's so many examples where I see institutions spend lots of time and money and launch a website, and then it statistically performs worse. It loads slower, it has more issues. They load it up with all sorts of JavaScript. They're doing all sorts of crazy things, and they're doing it because they're trying to subjectively appease an internal editorial lens that's totally disconnected from the realities of the market. Unless you're the top 1% of institutions that have a brand that can carry that kind of a conversation, the rest of the folks, especially really everyone in the non-traditional space by and large, needs to think a little bit more like consumers and reduce friction and make things easier. School should be hard, but going back to school should be easy. And everything that's outside of the classroom should be as easy as possible. And for some reason along the way, I think we took the idea of rigor and thought we'd apply it to the entire process, and that was Definitely a mistake.
Well, and I've mentioned earlier in this conversation the equity and access and all of that. The harder you make it, the more that people who are first generation or don't have a background in this, they're going to fall off. They're going to fall through all those
100%.
cracks. I see those friction points as the cracks that people fall through.
100%. And I think that not enough folks look at that. And I think for institutions moving into the non-traditional space, it's really important to like self-reflect on like missionally how that connects. Even during my time at Southern New Hampshire, the organization, I can't stress how great that experience was. There was still some rubs with campus about the growth of online. And I remember going all the way back to the history books and saying, hold on, like we were founded in 1932 on the second story of a fruit stand. And there's stories of students carrying handicapped students up the stairs to make sure they could make it to class. Southern New Hampshire was the first institution in the country to offer payment plans. You could pay by cash by week. And like along the way, it became a traditional campus institution. But really, when you look back on it, like this was a very different role. And we have a partner at Kanahoma now that's really strong in the healthcare space and it's a faith-based institution. And we had a lot of conversations about, well, let's go back to your founding. Let's really talk about what it is that we were being tasked to do. Not in every case, but by and large, the founding of these institutions was not to just provide traditional residential campus experiences to 18 to 22-year-olds. It was to address broader and more significant societal needs that included 18 to 22-year-olds, but not exclusively. And the more we look back on it, the more I think we realize that something happened where we all started to worry about how elite we were in rankings, and we were exclusive, and we were measuring success based on who we denied, not based on who we educated. And the non-traditional side of this industry is shaking that off, and I think it's so welcomed and so awesome. But it still lingers. Every time U.S. News puts out a new report, it still hangs there. But there's a lot of great institutions that are doing meaningful work, I think, to change that and evolve and grow beyond it.
I have a friend and colleague who is spending, I think she said $2 million a year toward getting U.S. News and World Report rankings up. And I just think about $2 million a year and the number of students that could help with scholarships, or the amount that you could be spending on support services or all of that just to move up in the rankings. That is it.
Yep.
And it's just so silly.
It is, and the sad part is that I've never really fully understood the motivation behind it. I'd like to think it's a marketing one, but as a marketer who has marketed U.S. News, there's only been a few rare cases where we found a ranking that really mattered and made any semblance of a difference. Top one, number one value, sure, okay, like you can tout that. UCLA literally number one, okay, sure, you can tout that. But for everybody else who's like, we're number 17 regional west, it's like literally no one cares, and all you're telling people is that there's 16 schools better than you. And so if we're not doing it for marketing, like, are we just doing it, and unfortunately I think it's an internal thing, whether it's board pressure or internal academic aspiration and the desire to conflate our own success to make our own moves in the industry, whatever it is. I'm just so inspired by all the institutions that are taking hard stances against this movement. And I'm not opposed to rankings. I'm just opposed to the methodology. And, if we can do a better job of measuring outputs, not inputs, I'm actually fine with that. And the college scorecards attempted to do that, and there's a lot of flaws in it, but at least it was an attempt to move in that direction. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with helping consumers make connections and comparisons. But if the idea is that we're going to educate less people so we rank higher, that's not a great feeling. And I don't know, can't imagine being a part of something like that.
No, and trying to get sort of false apps so that you can deny more students so that can improve your numbers. Like, what in the world?
Oh, that's so real. Yeah. That is so real. And like, it's just, there's a lot of games that people play, pushing early acceptance sooner to apply pressure to students, making them think they have to do early to get in, and swinging. There's just a lot of gamesmanship, and the question would be, what if you could educate more? And I'll say, I've been part of institutions that have served 500 students online, and literally, when I left, 77,000. I'm most proud of the breadth of impact, and so it's pretty cool when it's like, the more successful we are, the more students come. Not just the more successful we are, the number of students is fixed. So I'm a big fan of open admission institutions where it's variable, and the better we are as marketers, the more we enroll and the more we're reaching students that otherwise would go nowhere or would go to a competitor where they may be underserved. That's definitely the side of the space that gins me up a little bit.
Yeah, I'm super passionate about access and affordability and making sure that we're serving students who maybe wouldn't have had a chance at a higher education, or they're looking for an opportunity to change not just the trajectory of their life, but the trajectory of their family and their communities. It's just such an important part of being a citizen to have a good education, just even beyond the workforce benefits and the benefits to you personally. Having an educated citizenry is just so important. And that means everybody. And whether that's higher education in the sense of a traditional college experience, or, the programs that you were mentioning that are, boot camps, or whether that's going to school to become a welder or a forklift driver, but having some sort of opportunity to enrich your life through learning, I think is important.
Yeah. I totally agree. And what just inspired me, I would say, I've never said this out loud, so I'll say it here. I would love to see more of our peers that we know in this industry leave traditional institutions for non-traditional ones, or at least leave a traditional institution for one that's blended across the two. I just think we have such a wealth of talent in our space, and unfortunately a lot of it is leaving, which is a whole separate conversation. And I just think a lot of those folks would be deeply challenged and fulfilled moving into a non-traditional space that's more performance and data driven. Like, this is a hard space to market in. Like, every day I get up and it's like, wow, like we are after it. And it's so fun and it's so challenging, and it's just very different than my experiences at more traditional elite institutions. And I'm sure that those experiences exist in some of those. But for folks that are maybe thinking about moving to newer pastures, I would just say non-traditional pastures are waiting, and those institutions are great, and your talents could really be applied in a way to make a meaningful impact.
Absolutely. I have historically worked at access institutions, and then briefly was at a school that considered itself elite. And it was sort of at, I would describe it as kind of like the lower edge of the elite side of things, like kind of just scrambling to keep grabbing that eliteness. And it just wasn't for me. Like that feeling of we're doing this because we want other people to view us as great it just wasn't a good feeling. It didn't feel like it was about the students, and the mission didn't really align with who I was personally. And so I had a bunch of people say, why would you leave what you had to go to kind of a regional campus? I mean, it's large and it has a growing number of programs. And it's like, because they have this entrepreneurial spirit where they're looking at what students want and need and are providing that, instead of like, oh, no, you might want this, but we know better than you, and we're going to give you what we think you need, which is something that we have been doing for 200 years in the exact same way.
Yeah, completely. Well, I'll say, I mean, I'm a color from the side of the line that I'm on, but when I saw where you went, I was geeked out. I'm very familiar, have followed for a long time, and just the breadth of impact is so cool. I mean, the ability, percentages stay the same, but the numbers get larger, meaning like, any institution says, oh, we grew 5% year over year. That's meaningful. One of our partners, we've grown 30% year over year. But when you grow, in a down market, which is great. When you grow 30% in a down market, when you're talking about, thousands of students and hundreds of students, it's pretty cool to step back and think, we didn't beat our app goal and get an extra 50 students. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's wonderful. But, SNU got me that taste of like, it's fun to think, no, we're impacting thousands of lives. And so like the scale that you get to play at, and that we get to play with large institutions is just really fun, and adds a whole other level of complexity too, because the types of marketing that you can do just totally open up and change. And so it's just, I think it's a fun side of the space to be on. I'm like really excited for you.
I'm super happy to be at a place that sort of jives with my values. And I was, if you haven't yet listened to the episode where I interviewed Alan Stein, that was life-changing. I was sitting and he was talking about how burnout doesn't come from being overworked. Burnout comes with when your values are in conflict with the values of your leadership or your organization. And I had this moment of, oh my God, that's why I'm burned out. And 2 weeks later, the president of Old Dominion called me and said, hey, would you like to come out here and interview? And it was like, Yeah, I was totally primed for it because of that conversation.
Yeah. I used to sleep at the office at Southern New Hampshire. It was really like crazy. I'm down to work, but you're right. It's probably more the values thing, which is that like I don't want to trade family time for work time. I will work as hard as I possibly can within the windows that I have, and I really don't love that I have sacrificed some of those windows in order to get things done. And so I gotta reflect on that. That's kind of deep. That might help me answer a little bit on even what I'm going through, which is like I can push through and keep working hard. I like to work hard. I like to play hard. But maybe I'm not loving some of the trade-offs that I've made occasionally.
See, Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, changing lives.
That's like really good. Yeah,
this has been such an awesome conversation, Seth. You are awesome to follow on Twitter, and I love your newsletter. Every time I read it, I'm like, that is awesome. That is awesome. So everybody listening should sign up for it. But where can people find you?
I'm Seth Odell at pretty much everything. So Seth Odell on Twitter and LinkedIn. I have a newsletter, which if you go to canahoma.com, you can get. It's on the bottom of the homepage. The newsletter is like my favorite thing. I've loved writing it. I just wish I had more time to write more consistently. I really enjoy it. Twitter is my hot takes, and like anybody can send me requests on LinkedIn. I love this industry and this space. I feel like so grateful for everybody I've met, and so I am never one to shy away from a new connection or a new friendship. So like folks can track me down at any of those, canahoma.com or Seth Odell, wherever they social, I will probably.
And I strongly recommend following him everywhere and signing up for those newsletters. I think I need to sign up on my ODU email now, but I love how they're just really digestible. They're not big giant blocks of text. They're just, you can I think you use bold to kind of guide people through the content. You can tell that you're a really good content marketer.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Everyone's so busy. So my argument is always that every newsletter should be able to be read in 3 minutes or less. So it's like just enough time to like have a sip of coffee and think about something, and then we're out the door.
Yeah, it's awesome. So. It's great stuff. Well, thank you, Seth. For listeners, you can always join in the conversation about this episode using the hashtag HigherEdCMO on both LinkedIn and on Twitter. You can find me on both spaces. On Twitter, I am Jaime Hunt IMC. That's JAIME HUNT IMC. And on LinkedIn, I'm Jaime Hunt. I'm always eager to chat. You can pick my brain. Just like Seth, I really like connecting with people. So please feel free to reach out. I love hearing from listeners. And in the meantime, let's go out there and bust some silos.
Hey y'all, Zach here from Enrollify. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO with Jaime Hunt. If you like this episode, do us a huge favor and hit that follow and subscribe button below. Furthermore, if you've got just 2 minutes to spare, we would greatly appreciate you leaving a rating and a review of this show on Apple Podcasts. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. But Enrollify is far more than just a podcast network. Enrollify is where higher ed comes to learn new marketing skills, discover new products and services, and find their next job. We're a growing, learning community of 4,000 members, and we'd love to welcome you into the fold. You can access our free blog articles, newsletters, e-courses, and more, or purchase our master course on how to market a university with Terry Flannery at enrollify.org. We look forward to meeting you soon and welcoming you into the community. Again, you can subscribe for free at enrollify.org.